The blood on Nora Sullivan's hands wasn't hers, but the sheriff standing in her boarding house doorway didn't seem to care about that distinction. She had been 23 years old when her husband died 6 months ago in a shootout outside the saloon, leaving her with a 2-story building in Red River, New Mexico territory, and debts that threatened to swallow her whole. Now, in the scorching summer of 1878, she stood in her entryway watching the lawman's eyes travel from her stained apron to the open door of the kitchen, where a traveling merchant lay groaning on her table, a bullet wound in his shoulder that she had been trying to clean. "He stumbled in here about an hour ago," Nora explained, wiping her trembling hands on a clean cloth. "Said he was robbed on the road from Santa Fe. I have been doing what I can, but I am no doctor." The sheriff nodded slowly, his weathered face softening. "Doc Henderson is 3 towns over, will not be back until tomorrow. You are doing what needs doing, Mrs. Sullivan. I will send word if we catch the bandits." He tipped his hat and left, his boots heavy on the wooden porch. Nora returned to her patient, her dark hair falling loose from its pins as she bent over him. The boarding house had 5 rooms upstairs, and before her husband died, they had been full most nights. Red River sat on a crucial route between Santa Fe and Texas, and travelers needed places to rest. But since becoming a widow, Nora had struggled to keep even 2 rooms occupied. Women running businesses alone were viewed with suspicion, and her youth made it worse. Some men assumed she was running a different kind of establishment. Others simply took their business elsewhere, uncomfortable with a woman in charge. The merchant survived the night, and by morning Nora had cleaned him up enough that he could rest comfortably. She was in the kitchen making breakfast when she heard the front door open. She had stopped locking it during daylight hours, hoping to encourage travelers to inquire about rooms. "We are open," she called out, cracking eggs into a pan. "Rooms are 50 cents a night, includes breakfast and supper." "That is a fair price," a man's voice responded, deep and measured. "I am looking for a place to stay, just for the night." Nora wiped her hands and walked into the front room. The man standing there was tall, probably in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. His clothes were dusty from travel, and he wore his gun low on his hip like a man who knew how to use it. But his eyes were what caught her attention, a clear blue-gray that seemed almost startling against his tanned face. "I have 3 rooms available," she said, keeping her voice professional. "The one at the end of the hall has the best window for cross breeze, if that matters to you." "It does," he said, pulling coins from his pocket. "Name is Preston Hall. I have been driving cattle up from Texas, but my horse threw a shoe about 5 miles back. The blacksmith said it would take until tomorrow to get to my animal, so I figured I might as well rest properly." Nora took his money, their fingers brushing briefly. She felt a flutter in her stomach that she firmly ignored. "I am Nora Sullivan. Supper is at 6. There is a washroom at the end of the hall, and I keep clean water in the pitcher by the stairs." Preston nodded, picking up his worn saddlebag. "Obliged, madam." She watched him climb the stairs, noting the slight limp in his left leg before returning to her cooking. The merchant needed broth and bread, nothing too heavy while he healed. She had learned basic nursing from her mother, who had tended to half the town back in Missouri before they moved west. Those skills had become unexpectedly useful. The morning passed quietly. Nora changed the merchant's bandages, cleaned the guest rooms that were not occupied, and began preparing supper. She made extra, hoping the smell of roasting chicken might attract more customers from the street. Her savings were nearly depleted, and if she could not turn the boarding house profitable soon, she would lose everything. Preston came down around 4 in the afternoon, his hair damp from washing, wearing a clean shirt. "Madam, I could not help but notice you hauling water up those stairs. If you need help with anything, I have got time before supper." Nora paused in her kneading of bread dough. Accepting help from a male guest could start rumors, but her back ached from the constant work, and her pride was already worn thin. "The rain barrel out back needs emptying into the garden if you are genuinely offering. The vegetables are struggling in this heat." "Consider it done," Preston said, and disappeared through the back door. She watched through the window as he found the bucket and started working, his movements efficient and unhurried. There was something solid about him, something that spoke of reliability. She kneaded her bread more vigorously, irritated with herself for noticing. By supper time, the merchant was well enough to sit up and take some broth, and Preston joined her at the dining table. She had set out the good plates, trying to make the meal feel welcoming despite there being only the two of them. "This is excellent," Preston said after his first bite. "I have been eating trail food for 3 months. I almost forgot what real cooking tastes like." "You have been on the trail that long?" Nora asked, passing him the bowl of carrots. "Longer, actually. I signed on with a cattle outfit in San Antonio back in March. We just delivered the herd to a ranch outside Santa Fe. Most of the crew headed back south, but I figured I might look for work up here for a while." "What kind of work?" Preston shrugged. "Whatever needs doing. I can handle horses, mend fences, some carpentry. My pa was a rancher before he died, so I grew up doing a bit of everything." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and Nora found herself relaxing in a way she had not with any man since her husband's death. Preston did not leer at her or make inappropriate comments. He simply ate his food and complimented her cooking, treating her with the same respect he might show any boarding house keeper. "How long have you been running this place?" he asked eventually. 6 months on my own. My husband and I ran it together for 2 years before that." She did not elaborate on how her husband died, and Preston did not push. "It is a good location," he observed. "Right on the main route. You should have steady business." "Should," Nora agreed. "But running it alone has proven difficult. People are not always comfortable with a woman in charge." Preston's jaw tightened slightly. "Their loss. This is the cleanest, most comfortable place I have stayed in months. You clearly know what you are doing." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you. I am trying my best." After supper, Preston helped her clear the dishes despite her protests. "My mother raised me right," he said simply. "Besides, you have been on your feet all day. Least I can do is carry some plates." That night, lying in her small room off the kitchen, Nora stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about the cowboy sleeping upstairs. He was just a guest, passing through like all the others. By tomorrow, he would collect his horse and ride on, and she would probably never see him again. There was no point in letting her thoughts drift toward his kind eyes or the way his presence had made the house feel less empty. But morning came, and Preston did not leave. He came down for breakfast and asked, "Madam, would you mind if I stayed another night? My horse needs more rest before a long ride, and I am in no particular hurry." Nora's heart skipped in a way she tried to ignore. "Of course, same rate applies." "Fair enough," Preston said, handing over another 50 cents. That day followed a similar pattern. Preston helped with small tasks around the boarding house, fixing a loose board on the porch and tightening the pump handle on the well. Nora found herself looking forward to their meals together, to the easy conversation, and the way he listened when she talked about her struggles with the business. "You need more advertising," he said over supper that second night. "People passing through do not always know this place exists. Maybe a bigger sign out front." "I have thought about it," Nora admitted, "but I cannot afford to pay for one right now. What if I made you one?" I have got some skill with woodworking. If you have any old boards and some paint, I could put something together." She studied him across the table. "Why would you do that?" Preston met her eyes steadily. "Because you have been kind to me and I can see you are working hard. And maybe because I like the idea of helping someone build something instead of just wandering from place to place." The next morning, Nora woke to the sound of sawing. She threw a shawl over her nightgown and hurried outside to find Preston in the yard, working with boards he must have found in the shed. "What are you doing?" she called. "Making good on my promise," he said, looking up with sawdust in his hair. "I found enough scrap wood to work with. Should have a decent sign by this evening." Nora stood there, her arms wrapped around herself against the morning chill, and felt something shift in her chest. This man, who had only meant to stay one night, was building her a sign. The merchant left that afternoon, pressing an extra $1 into Nora's hand in gratitude for her care. She tried to refuse, but he insisted. "You saved my life, madam. That is worth more than all the money I lost to those bandits." Preston finished the sign by evening as promised. It was simple but well made, with Sullivan's boarding house painted in bold letters, and below that, clean rooms, good food, fair prices. "It is perfect," Nora said softly, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "I cannot thank you enough." "Then do not," Preston said, wiping paint from his hands. "Just let me stay another night and we will call it even." She laughed, surprised by the lightness she felt. "You are going to run out of reasons to extend your stay eventually." "Maybe," he said, his expression turning serious. "Or maybe I will just be honest and say I like it here." That night Nora could not sleep. She kept thinking about Preston's words, about the way he looked at her, respectful but with an undercurrent of something warmer. She was attracted to him, she could admit that to herself. But attraction was dangerous for a widow trying to maintain her reputation and her business. If people thought she was involved with a guest, the gossip would destroy what little credibility she had left. The next morning, she was surprised to see 2 new guests at her door, a married couple traveling to Texas. They had seen the new sign and wanted a room. Nora took their payment with shaking hands, relief flooding through her. 2 occupied rooms meant a little more breathing room with her debts. Preston came down for breakfast and grinned when he saw the couple at the table. "Told you a better sign would help," he said quietly to Nora in the kitchen. "You did," she agreed, dishing up eggs and bacon. "Are you leaving today?" The question hung between them. Preston was quiet for a long moment. "Do you want me to leave?" Nora's hand stilled. Did she want him to leave? The practical part of her brain said yes before things got complicated, but her heart, her treacherous, lonely heart, wanted him to stay. "I want you to do what is best for you," she said finally, not quite answering the question. "Then I will stay a while longer," Preston said. "Red River seems like a decent town. I should be able to find work, and I would rather pay for a good room here than camp outside town." It became a pattern. Preston would stay a few more days, then a few more. He found work at the livery stable, helping the blacksmith with horses. The pay was modest, but it covered his room and board with a little left over. He fixed things around the boarding house without being asked, replacing worn hinges and patching the roof where it leaked. Other guests came and went, drawn by the new sign and by word of mouth. Nora's cooking earned praise, and slowly, her reputation as a respectable and capable boarding house keeper grew. Preston's presence helped with that, oddly enough. Having a reliable man around who clearly respected her made other guests feel more comfortable, and his work at the livery gave him standing in the community. 3 weeks after Preston had first arrived, Nora was in the garden when she heard a commotion from the street. She hurried around front to find Preston and the blacksmith helping an overturned wagon. A family had been passing through when their wheel broke, and now their belongings were scattered across the dusty road. "Madam, these folks need a place to stay while their wagon gets fixed," Preston called to her. "Have you got room?" Nora looked at the exhausted mother with 3 small children clinging to her skirts and made a quick decision. "I've got 2 rooms available. Let us get you all inside and settled." The family stayed for 3 days while the blacksmith fabricated a new wheel. The children ran through the house, bringing life and noise that reminded Nora of what a home should feel like. Preston was patient with them, showing the oldest boy how to whittle and letting the younger ones climb on him like he was a tree. Watching him play with those children did something to Nora. She found herself imagining things she had no business imagining, a future that included more than just running a boarding house alone. "You are good with them," she said one evening after the children had gone to bed. Preston glanced up from the piece of wood he was carving. "I like kids. Always figured I would have some of my own someday if I ever settled down enough." "Why have you not settled down, I mean?" He was quiet for a moment, his knife moving in steady strokes. "Never found the right place, I guess. Or the right reason." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Nora looked away first, her heart pounding. This was dangerous territory. She could not afford to fall for a drifter, someone who might leave any day. But even as she thought it, she knew it was too late. She was already falling. A month passed. Summer deepened into August heat, and Preston was still there. He had become part of the rhythm of the boarding house, helping with the heavy work and bringing in a steady income from the livery. They shared meals and conversations, slowly revealing pieces of themselves to each other. Nora learned that Preston had lost his parents young and been raised by an uncle who drank too much. He had left home at 16 and spent the next 12 years wandering, taking work where he could find it. He was 28 now, and she could hear in his voice that he was tired of wandering. Preston learned that Nora had married at 19 to escape her own difficult home situation. Her husband had not been cruel, but he had not been particularly kind either. Their marriage had been one of convenience more than affection. His death had grieved her more for the practical difficulties it created than for the loss of companionship. "You ever think about marrying again?" Preston asked one evening. They were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. Nora's hands tightened on her coffee cup. "I have thought about it, but marriage is complicated for a woman who owns property. Everything I have would become my husband's property by law. If I chose wrong, I could lose everything I have worked for. That does not seem fair." "It is not fair, but it is the law." She glanced at him. "Why do you ask?" Preston looked out at the horizon, his profile strong in the fading light. "Just curious about how you see your future, I suppose." They sat in charged silence, both aware they were dancing around something neither was quite ready to name. In September, trouble arrived in the form of Nora's brother-in-law. Marcus Sullivan appeared at the boarding house door with a lawyer and a claim that, as her dead husband's brother, he had a right to half the property. "That is ridiculous," Nora said, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "Thomas left everything to me in his will." "A will that was written before he knew he was dying," Marcus countered. "He was a weasel of a man, thin and sharp-featured, with none of his brother's better qualities. Family property should stay in the family." The lawyer, a tired-looking man who clearly wished he was elsewhere, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Sullivan, technically your late husband did not own the property free and clear. There was still money owed on it at the time of his death. Mr. Marcus Sullivan here argues that as next of kin, he has a claim to help settle the estate." Nora felt the floor tilt under her. She had been making payments on those debts, slowly but surely. But if Marcus could tie things up in legal challenges, she would lose everything anyway. Preston, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. "How much is owed?" The lawyer consulted his papers. $247. It was a fortune. Nora's savings had maybe $30, and that was meant for winter supplies. She opened her mouth to say she needed time, but Preston spoke first. "I can cover it." Everyone turned to stare at him. Nora felt her heart stop. "Preston, no, that is too much." "I have been saving for years," he said, his eyes fixed on her face. "Never had anything worth spending it on before." "Let me do this." Marcus looked furious. "Now wait just a minute. Who is this man? What is his relationship to my sister-in-law?" "That is none of your business," Nora said sharply. "But for your information, Mr. Hall is a paying guest who has become a trusted friend. If he is willing to loan me the money, I will accept and pay him back with interest." "Actually," Preston said quietly, "I was thinking it might be more of an investment than a loan." Nora stared at him. He was still looking at her, and in his eyes she saw everything he was not saying out loud. The lawyer coughed. "Perhaps we should discuss the financial arrangements privately." An hour later, Marcus stormed out of the boarding house, his legal challenge defeated. The property debts were paid in full, with Preston's name added to the deed as a co-owner in exchange for his investment. It was a business arrangement, carefully documented by the lawyer, but everyone in the room knew it meant something more. After the lawyer left, Nora and Preston stood in the empty dining room, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. "You did not have to do that," Nora said softly. "Yes, I did. I could not stand by and watch that weasel take everything you have worked for. But your savings, everything you have been putting aside, were just sitting there doing nothing," Preston interrupted. "Now they are invested in something real, something that matters. In this place and—" He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are hardworking and honest. I know you make the best biscuits in New Mexico territory. I know you have got a kind heart, the way you took care of that merchant when he was shot. I know being around you makes me want to stop wandering and build something permanent." He took a step closer. "And I think you might feel something similar, unless I have been reading this whole situation wrong." She should deny it. She should maintain proper distance. But Nora was so tired of being alone, of being strong all by herself. "You are not reading it wrong," she whispered. Preston reached out and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender. "Then maybe we should stop pretending this is just about a boarding house." Their first kiss was soft and questioning, both of them tentative after dancing around their feelings for so long. But when Nora leaned into him and Preston's arms came around her, everything suddenly felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. They pulled apart slowly, and Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably stop staying in the guest room if we are going to court properly." "It would not be appropriate." Nora laughed, the sound watery with emotion. "Where would you go? I could ask around town for a room to rent. Or maybe there is space above the livery." He pulled back to look at her seriously. "I want to do this right, Nora. No gossip, no scandal. You have worked too hard to build your reputation for me to damage it." She loved him for that, for understanding what she stood to lose. "All right. We will court properly, the way respectable people do." Preston moved out the next day, finding a small room above the general store. But he came by the boarding house every day, taking Nora for proper walks around town, sitting with her on the porch where everyone could see them behaving respectably. They attended church together on Sunday, and the preacher gave them an approving nod. The town's opinion of Nora began to shift. With Preston openly courting her, she was no longer viewed as a potentially scandalous young widow, but as a woman being honorably pursued. Guests at the boarding house increased. drawn by the establishment's growing reputation for respectability and comfort. 3 months after their first kiss, on a cold December evening, Preston proposed. He did it properly, getting down on one knee in Nora's front parlor with a simple gold band he had commissioned from the jeweler. "Nora Sullivan, I came to your door planning to stay one night. Instead, I found where I belong. Will you marry me?" Nora pulled him to his feet and kissed him thoroughly before answering. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married in January of 1879 with half the town in attendance. The preacher gave a sermon about love finding us when we least expect it, and Nora walked down the aisle of the small church, feeling like she was finally stepping into the life she was meant to live. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous despite not being innocent children. Preston was gentle with her, patient in a way her first husband had never been. They learned each other slowly, with kisses and whispered words, building something based on mutual care and genuine desire. Life settled into a new rhythm. Preston continued working at the livery while also managing the heavier maintenance around the boarding house. Nora ran the day-to-day operations, keeping the rooms filled and the meals served. They were a team in a way she had never experienced before, each supporting the other. By spring, Nora realized she was pregnant. She told Preston while they were working in the garden together, planting vegetables for the summer season. "I am going to have a baby," she said, her voice soft with wonder and fear. Preston dropped his spade and pulled her into his arms, his face splitting into a huge grin. "Truly, truly. The doctor confirmed it yesterday, probably due in October." He spun her around carefully, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to be parents." The pregnancy was difficult. Nora spent much of the summer feeling exhausted and sick, struggling to keep up with the boarding house's demands. Preston hired a woman from town to help with the cooking and cleaning, insisting that Nora needed to rest more. "We can afford it now," he said, when she protested about the expense. "The boarding house is doing well, and my wages from the livery are steady. Let someone else help for a change." Their son was born on a cool October evening in 1879. The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when the midwife looked worried, but eventually, a healthy baby boy entered the world with a lusty cry. "He is perfect," Preston breathed, holding his son with shaking hands and tears on his face. "What should we name him?" "Thomas," Nora said softly. "After my first husband, he may not have been the love of my life, but he gave me the boarding house and that brought me to you." Preston nodded, understanding the gesture for what it was. "Thomas Hall. It is a good, strong name. Being parents changed them both." Preston became even more rooted, any lingering trace of his wandering ways completely gone. He built a cradle with his own hands and rocked his son to sleep every night, singing old songs he remembered from his childhood. Nora discovered a fierce protectiveness she had never known she possessed. She also found joy in the simple moments, nursing her baby while watching Preston fix something in the yard, or seeing him play with Thomas on the porch while guests smiled at the sight. The boarding house continued to thrive. Having a family living on the premises made it feel more like a home, and travelers appreciated the warm atmosphere. Preston expanded the business by adding a small stable out back where guests could board their horses for an additional fee. The income let them hire permanent help, a young woman named Sarah who handled much of the cooking and a teenage boy who managed the stable and did odd jobs. Years passed in a happy blur. Thomas grew into an energetic toddler, then a curious child. Nora and Preston added to their family, a daughter named Mary in 1881 and another son named James in 1884. The boarding house expanded, with Preston building an additional wing of rooms to meet demand. Red River grew too. The railroad came through in 1882, bringing even more travelers and business. Preston was elected to the town council in 1885, respected for his steady judgment and fairness. Nora became known as one of the most successful businesswomen in the territory, running the largest and most respected boarding house between Santa Fe and Texas. But through all the success and growth, what mattered most was what happened in the quiet moments. The way Preston still kissed Nora goodbye every morning like it was something precious. The way she watched him teach their sons to ride and their daughter to plant a garden. The way they sat together on the porch after their children were in bed, hands intertwined, talking about everything and nothing. "You ever regret it?" Nora asked one evening in the summer of 1889. They were watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained through the years. Staying that first night, you could have kept wandering, seen more of the country. Preston was quiet for a moment, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of her hand. "Not for a single second. I spent 12 years wandering, looking for something without knowing what it was. Turns out it was not a place at all, it was you." "That is extraordinarily romantic for a cowboy," Nora teased, but her eyes were bright with tears. "I learned from the best," he said, pulling her close. "You took a chance on a drifter who showed up at your door. You trusted me with your business, your heart, your life. The least I can do is tell you every day that it was the best decision I ever made to stay." They kissed as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, the sounds of their children playing in the yard drifting through the evening air. As the 1890s arrived, their children grew older and their responsibilities shifted. Thomas, now 11, showed an interest in running the boarding house someday. He followed his mother around, learning how to keep accounts and manage guests. Mary, at 9, had her father's skill with horses and spent hours in the stable. James, the baby at 6, seemed determined to learn everything from everyone, equally fascinated by cooking, carpentry, and animal care. The boarding house had become an institution in Red River. Traveling salesmen requested their favorite rooms. Families on their way west made sure to time their journeys to include a stop at Sullivan's. The dining room could seat 20 now, and it was rarely empty. Preston had mostly given up his work at the livery by then, focusing instead on managing the boarding house's expansion and serving on the town council. But he still kept his hand in with horses, working with the animals they kept for guests. In the spring of 1893, a young couple arrived at the boarding house, newly married and heading west to start a ranch. Nora and Preston saw themselves in these two young people, full of hope and determination, and went out of their way to make them feel welcome. "You remind me of us," Nora told the young woman while showing her to their room. 14 years ago, I was running this place alone, scared I was going to lose everything. Then Preston showed up and changed my entire life." "That is so romantic," the young woman sighed. "How long did you know each other before you married?" "About 6 months, start to finish. He arrived in July of 1878 and we married that January. He checked in for a night and just stayed." Preston, who was helping the young husband with their bags, laughed. "Best decision I ever made." "Well, second best. The first best was building that sign that made me have an excuse to stick around a few more days." The young couples left the next morning with smiles and wishes for a happy future. After they were gone, Nora leaned against Preston, feeling the weight of their years together in the best possible way. "You think they will make it?" she asked. "If they want it badly enough," Preston said. "Like we did. Like we still do." That summer brought a drought that tested everyone in the territory. Water became precious, and the garden struggled despite their best efforts. Preston organized the town's response, coordinating water distribution and helping families whose wells ran dry. Nora kept the boarding house running, though she had to raise prices slightly to cover the cost of hauling water from the river. They made it through, as they always did. When the rains finally came in September, the whole town celebrated. Preston and Nora stood in their garden, letting the water soak them, laughing like children while their own children danced around them in the mud. "We have been through a lot together," Nora said, rain streaming down her face. "And we will go through a lot more," Preston replied, pulling her close despite both of them being soaked. "But we will do it together. That is what matters." The years continued their steady march. Thomas turned 18 in 1897 and began taking over more of the boarding house's daily operations. He had his mother's head for business and his father's way with people, a combination that served him well. Mary, at 16, was courting the blacksmith's son, a steady young man who treated her with respect. James, 13 and full of energy, was already talking about wanting to see some of the country before settling down. "Let him wander a little if he wants," Preston said when Nora worried about their youngest son leaving. "I had to wander before I was ready to find home. Maybe he does too." "You are probably right," Nora agreed, "but I do not have to like it." Preston smiled and kissed her temple. "He will come back. Home has a way of calling us back when we are ready." In 1899, New Mexico Territory saw significant changes as more settlers arrived, and the old ways of the frontier began to fade. Red River had electric lights now, and there was talk of paving the main street. The boarding house had indoor plumbing installed, a major undertaking that Preston supervised personally. "We have come a long way from hauling water from the well," Nora marveled, turning the tap and watching clean water flow. "Progress," Preston agreed, "though I will miss some of the old ways." "Things were simpler when I first arrived." "Simpler, but harder," Nora pointed out. "I do not miss washing every sheet by hand or heating bath water on the stove." They stood in their modern bathroom, middle-aged now but still deeply in love, and reflected on how much had changed while the important things remained the same. Mary married in the spring of 1900, a beautiful ceremony that left both Nora and Preston teary. Watching their daughter start her own life reminded them of their own beginning, full of hope and possibility. "You think we did right by them?" Preston asked that night, holding Nora close in their bed. "Our children." "I think we loved them and showed them what a real partnership looks like," Nora said. "That is all we could do." Thomas married 2 years later, bringing his wife Emily to live at the boarding house and help run it. The young woman fit seamlessly into the family, and Nora found herself with a daughter-in-law who became a true friend. Preston was 52 now, and Nora was 47. They were grandparents, with Mary giving them their first grandchild in 1901. The boarding house remained successful, now truly a family business with Thomas and Emily handling most of the day-to-day operations while Nora supervised and Preston managed the property. They still took their evening walks when weather permitted, still sat on the porch watching sunsets. Their hair was graying and their faces showed lines, but when they looked at each other, they saw the young people who had fallen in love over shared meals and honest conversation. 24 years, Preston said one evening in July of 1902. "It has been 24 years since I walked through that door." "Planning to stay a while longer?" Nora asked with a smile. "At least a few more decades," he replied, kissing her softly. "I am not done with you yet." In 1905, James returned from 2 years of traveling, ready to settle down at last. He brought with him a young woman he had met in Colorado, and Nora saw in her son's eyes the same look Preston had worn all those years ago when he decided to stop running. "She is the one," James told his parents. I know it sounds crazy, but I know. It is not crazy at all, Preston said, clapping his son on the shoulder. When you know, you know. Trust that feeling. The new century brought more changes. Automobiles began appearing on Red River's streets, though horses were still more common. The boarding house adapted, adding a garage for guests with motor cars while maintaining the stable for those who still traveled by horse. Preston and Nora watched it all from their porch, amazed at how much the world had changed since that summer day in 1878, when a tired cowboy had walked through their door looking for a place to stay one night. If someone had told me then that I would still be here 30 years later, I would not have believed them, Preston mused. It was 1908 now, and he was 58, his hair more silver than brown. I would not have believed that I could be this happy, Nora added. She was 53, still running the boarding house with energy and competence, though she had more help now. They had survived droughts and floods, economic panics and personal losses. Nora's mother had passed in 1903, and Preston's uncle had died the year before that. But through it all, they had each other, and the family they had built together. Their grandchildren played in the yard where Preston had once built a sign to have an excuse to stay longer. Thomas and Emily were expecting their third child. Mary's children visited every Sunday. James and his wife were talking about starting a family soon. We built something good, Nora said, watching the chaos of family life unfold around them. Something that will last. We did, Preston agreed. Though I maintain that you did most of the building. I just had the good sense to stick around and help. She laughed and took his hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after 3 decades together. You did more than stick around.